outside? Should I run and hide? How do I take my company worldwide? Do you love the law? Did you watch Hee-Haw? What's the weirdest thing that you ever saw? What's it like in court? Favorite sport? Can you help with my book report? Is my hair too long? Am I right or wrong? And do you mind if I sing along to anything? Ask Alan anything in the world.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Ask Alan, the podcast. I'm Alan Crone, the CEO of the Crone Law Firm, and I have with me today, we were just talking about how long we've known each other. It's been a long time. A good friend of mine, Michael Graber, who is the head of Epic Pivot. And I have known Michael, like I say, for 15, 20 years. And he is always one of the most innovative business thinkers in, I'm going to say in America, certainly in the Southeast. And he's been very helpful to me in my business. Michael, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Alan. Honored to be here with you. It's nice to see you again.
It's my pleasure. Before we get into specifically Epic Pivot, tell me a little bit, tell our folks a little bit about your origin story. Where did you come from, and how did you get to where you are now?
I'm a native Memphian. I was born at the Baptist hospital that was imploded about 7 years ago, and then in my career, it's taken some interesting forks and twists. Originally, I wanted to be a writer and have an MFA in poetry, and was teaching poetry classes at the University of Memphis. At the same time, I had two children who were sick with cystic fibrosis. And so I couldn't lead the life of a young professor seeking tenure, that gypsy lifestyle, going to college, to university to college. And so decided I had to do something else for a living. And from that, sort of wound up through regional advertising agencies and then a mortgage software company in Oxford, Mississippi. And at that mortgage company, decided to take what we were doing. What we did is we were taking innovation techniques, formal innovation discipline, strategy techniques, and a lot of marketing. And we applied this formula there, and they more than doubled their revenue in 12 months. Wow. And so then we took our department and launched our company then almost 16 years ago, which has been fascinating. But I love Memphis. At that point, I made a decision to move back and be part of the city's renaissance and have the headquarters of our business here. Although most of our work is out of market, we still prefer to work within market. Originally, we wanted to just infuse every privately held company here with all of these growth engines, as we call them, formal innovation techniques, using anthropological, ethnographic business insights to really understand how they could differentiate from their competitors and then move on. But what we found is, like so many people, we had to apply the Beatles strategy. So to be popular in our Liverpool, we had to go to Hamburg. And so we had to start going out of market, work with bigger clients, build up the NASCAR logos on our website, and then start to work back at home.
Yeah. What's your personal professional mission, Michael? What are you trying? How are you trying to change the world?
That's a wonderful question, and it's required a detailed answer. Yeah. So my personal mission is to make business a force of good in the world. And the way that we have been handed, the way we think about business, where it's bottom line, where it's profit at any cost, is making the planet sick. And it's also dehumanizing the workforce. And if you look at the history of business, that's not the way it was intended. If you go back to, I'm not going to geek out too much, but if you go back to Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, right, which is kind of the paternalistic, invisible hand that profit takes care of itself, he wrote another book 8 months later called The Theory of Moral Sentiment, which was about what I'll call the maternal hand, how business takes care of the communities and its workers, right? And that's summarily ignored. Similarly, if you go get your MBA, you'll hear a lot about Darwin. You know, it's dog eat dog, it's competition, it's survival of the fittest. Interesting, if you read Origin of Species, he does say survival of the fittest 4 times, but he says love and community more than 400. And so if you start to think about that, what role could business play in terms of making its workers' lives much better, much where they spend the majority of their working hours and hold on to their talent, in terms of all of their ecosystems of communities and vendors and stakeholders, and then in terms of the planet itself. And then if you look at the precedent here, I'm just going to take one example. Something like Ben and Jerry's, right, is a good example of this, where because they're structured as a B Corp, even when they were bought by Unilever, they are able to hold on to their values. So the way they're judged is not just by money alone. They actually have different sets of books for their what they call a triple bottom line: people, planet, and profits. How they treat their people, what kind of money they're making, and then that kind of impact they're having on the planet. And so when they go and they source an ingredient, they make sure that, yes, they get a good quality product at a good quality price. But then secondly, equally important is the company has to provide a social good. I'll give you one example. Grayston Bakeries provides all of the cookie dough and brownie batters for Ben and Jerry's. Grayston Bakeries in Long Island does not consider itself a bakery, but a turnaround facility. They only hire recovering drug addicts and ex-felons. And once people start working there, they team them with psychologists, psychiatrists, credit restoration, life skills. They even have a housing program until people are more self-sufficient, and then a manager career pathing program. And so if you think about the impact, they used to, have several $1 million a year. Now it's about $200 million a year of lives that are transformed that way, just from that one source. And then if you think of all of the different companies from whom Ben and Jerry's are sourcing, because it's baked into the business model, business can be a force of good. And what I've found is that I stumbled upon this and changed during the pandemic, where I had some forced reflection, as many of us did. And I thought, we've made our companies millions and millions of dollars, but the world is getting more precarious. There's more unrest. We've got climate issues. We have humanitarian issues. We've never had more refugees afoot. And nonprofits and governments, God bless them, they haven't fixed the problem, but the private sector has the scale to be able to begin to do that if it has the willingness. Last thing I'll say about it is that there's been a 10-year study. It's called Firms of Endearment. And the companies that bake in this model that I'm talking about, making business a force of good, outperform their for-profit only competitors somewhere between 8x and 13x to 1. So it's good business, with good almost resonating with every connotation.
Yeah, I've said similar things about HR policies and practices that comply with employment laws. And, I think that business today, you've got to be thinking more on the human level, because humans have more options now to make a living than they used to when it comes to W-2 employment and working for someone else's company. And so, I think HR compliance is not just legal, but it's good business.
Right.
It's good business to have a mission that's more, it's bigger than yourself, to accomplish something good in the world. That's good business because you get somebody aligned with that mission, and they're more productive, they're more passionate. It just goes on down the line. So I love what you're saying about
Right.
Business being able to do good. It's not just, pie in the sky kind of, do-goodery if you're turned off by that, but it's good business. It's good business to make your community a better place, isn't it?
Yeah, you can do better by doing good, right? You can do very well by doing good. It simply is good business, and it's the smartest way to do business. You keep your employees longer, you keep them happier, you keep them higher performing. Your suppliers and vendors are happier. The communities where you do business are happy to have you, and you're making more money. I don't know why anyone would call that woke or scary or anything. In the way that the template of business, comes from the Chicago School of Economics, roughly in the 50s, and that's just outmoded. We can't exploit anymore. We can't just get something and source it for 50 cents and sell it for $1 and call that good business anymore. There are so many other factors. As you mentioned, HR is a great example. The whole game has changed, and every department and every division has changed, and everybody just needs to get in gear.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that, I don't want to, like you said, I don't want to get too wonky, but I've always believed that a lot of that comes from the fact that so much of the workforce in the 50s and 60s had just gone through a world war and then Korea, and you just had this. American society was consciously or subconsciously just more military and, you know, chain of command. I mean, even today, you hear people say in big companies, well, you got to follow your chain of command.
Right.
And I think that experience we had in the 40s of gearing up for war and everybody being involved in the military one way or another, really, I think it permeated our society for a long time in terms of the way we approach work. It was very much, okay, go take that hill, do it the way I say do it. And if you got in a time machine and went back to the 20s and before, I think you would find maybe not in the bigger companies, but even in smaller companies, a little more less autocratic than the companies we have now.
That's a great point. And I would refer anyone who talks about this topic to General McChrystal's book, Team of Teams. And his whole thing is about empowering small nodes of people with self-decision rights and to not centralize and hierarchize everything, but rather just these little groups need the intelligence to do the actions they're assigned to do. And so we much more all these nodes. He claims that doing business is like doing war against a terrorist state. This is what he learned in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that you have to decentralize, you have to empower. And it's instead of how we thought about it at scale in the Eisenhower era was very much like playing chess. But now he says it's like playing chess on 20 boards at once, and you move one piece on one board and they all move differently. And so because it's become so much more complex, we need to deal with that complexity by empowering people, giving them a sense of mission and purpose, and then also letting them be somewhat self-governing and trusting them.
All right, I'm gonna get that book. That sounds fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Well, tell me how all this relates to Epic Pivot. Tell me about Epic Pivot and how you're accomplishing your personal professional mission in that context.
Well, thank you. So Epic Pivot is 16 years old. We were the Southern Growth Studio. We merged with another firm and changed our name. We've worked with more than 300 clients. We work in human-centered design. So formal innovation, we help companies, particularly manufacturing companies and others, set up an innovation practice and teach them all the formal mindsets and methodologies and frameworks to be able to create this net new value. We also provide insights, which we have 3 business anthropologists on staff to deeply understand the wants, needs, and desires. Sometimes we do it for municipalities. Sometimes we do it for hospital systems. Sometimes we do it for nonprofits, but usually it's for for-profit businesses to give them these in-depth insights. Then we also do strategy. And then when we rebranded as Epic Pivot, we started doing what we call purposeful transformation. So taking organizations on this journey you and I are talking about, let them articulate a purpose and then change their strategy and structure and handle all the change management to be able to pay that off to future-proof their businesses.
Yeah, I've come up with a shocking statement in order to get communication going on this point. But I've started saying to people, businesses should be non-diverse, no diversity whatsoever. And everybody reacts to that. And I say, now here's what I mean by that. There should be no diversity with regard to alignment to your mission. And if you have complete alignment to the mission and you can articulate that well and document it well, and then spread that to the biggest audience you can, you're going to develop a non-diverse cadre of people that are all aligned to the mission, which is the material non-diversity. And then what you're going to end up with is a diverse group based on the accidents of nature, you know, color, sex, ethnicity, all of those things. that's really what we should be trying to align on. And I think if you do that, I think companies would really be surprised, not just with their own, with what they end up with in terms of a community that looks like the community, but I think they'd be much more productive than if you're just going out and trying to find an accountant that, for example, that maybe is close at hand.
Right.
May or may not relate to the mission. What do you think about that?
I love that. And I'm going to back that up with a data point. And
I love data point.
So your comment is so on target. Google's Project Aristotle, which was their study of high performance teams, showed that the number one foremost tenet of a high performance team was psychological safety. And that's where we get that phrase, it's from that study. But third and fourth were meaning through our work and purpose through our organization. And so aligning to that mission, aligning to that purpose gives people something they're inherently yearning for. And without it, you just create a void and a vacuum, and people don't know why they're doing what they're doing, which is why we have this whole industry of professional coaches and the Simon Sinek's of the world saying, start with why, because there's such a great lack of it. But by doing that, that is the great democratizer. Then everyone can have their relationship to that why, and it becomes almost this GPS system that everybody's going toward in their own way with their own lens.
What is the profile of a company that needs to work with Epic Pivot?
So it depends on our service line. Typically, our innovation clients, they have been releasing a bunch of Me Too products, and they need to take a big leap, and they make a brave decision that they want to lead the categories they're in and change the nature of the business. So they need to make a big leap, and they can't. They're addicted to their current business models. But with those with a purposeful transformation, it really is an earnestness. They want to do right by their employees. They want to see their employees flourish. They want to see their company flourish, and they want to create a legacy. So with our insights, innovation, and strategy, it typically is Fortune 1000 companies. Now with purposeful transformation, it's typically family-owned companies or companies that are owned by family offices with a long hold that are here who want to, again, create something that is outstanding and that's going to be a boon in their community and create. So I'll give you one example. We worked with a PPE company. I can't name them, but after we helped them with innovation, we helped them with strategy, and in the strategy was this purpose. And they grew to the point where they were getting a lot of offers from private equity. And then after some deep discernment and some coaching, they decided that they were going to capital exit, but they became an ESOP, an employee stock option program. So they did create several millionaires from the owners, multimillionaires, but then they also created thousands of hundreds of thousandaires with everybody who works in their factories and everybody who works in their corporate office. So it's true and radical, if you will, wealth equity vehicles that are available to us if we use these types of things. We have another client who, it's a plastic container company, and they realized that they needed to innovate to help their CPG companies meet their sustainability standards. So we did a tiered strategy, and ultimately their 10-year goal is to be out of plastics, which is revolutionary, and to be the supplier of choice for all of the large CPG food companies, the Krafts, the Mondelez, the Conagras, et cetera.
I'm going to ask you an interesting question. You talked about ESOPs, and you talked about that the future may not be in scaling. So if you look at the billionaires in Memphis, the most prominent are Pitt Hyde, Fred Smith. Pitt Hyde, AutoZone, a little more 20th century kind of business model, retail, so forth. FedEx, a little bit more innovative in the sense that he was kind of a new business model, et cetera. But still, both businesses built on scaling.
Right.
Do you think billionaires in the future are going to look like that, or is their business going to be completely different in terms of that kind of success? Well, I'm going to take the word success out. I'm going to say that kind of wealth.
I think that kind of wealth's only happened because of the financialization of things. I don't know if there'll be that kind of scale and empire that we have. I see things moving, an emerging model of capitalism being more like Mondragon. If you know the Mondragon Empire in the Basque region of Spain, which happened, and these are all ESOP-like owned cooperatives that I think they were about an $80 billion collective that had. So let me put this in a different context. We're both from Memphis. We both really want Memphis to succeed. And as a majority African-American city, imagine if we had businesses cropping up that were owned by all the employees that work there, who had this sense of purpose and were galvanized because of it. And then they were creating wealth for their whole communities, you know, for New Chicago, for other parts of Fraser, for South Memphis, and they were headquartered there. To me, that's going to be the type of wealth generation that preserves cities and ignites the citizenry in the model where we have 1 or 2 billionaires, and the patronage model is great, but I think that its time may have passed.
Yeah, I go to a lot of business conferences, and I'm sure you do too, and you know, everybody's still talking about scaling, and I'm doing business more and more with companies that I can tell are into scaling, particularly service companies. And the service is always, you know, it may be good, but it's always a little off, because if if you're getting a fractional law firm, for example,
right?
They're going to have a certain suite of offerings that may not be customized to what you need. And so I think that ironically, to a certain extent, as we get into AI and all those things, we may be seeing less scaling and more customization. What am I off base there? What do you think?
No, I think the whole concept of scale and hyper growth is very much almost a Clinton era, Reagan era type. You have to do that. If you're not growing, you're dying, was the adage. And that's been put in the mindset of every MBA student. But in some ways, I don't think that culture, obviously, those types of companies are burning out their employees, so they can no longer count on their workforce. They are also running out of cash on that race to scale. To me, you have to have a step back and think almost philosophically. What is the value we're creating, first off? And if you can answer that, then what purpose is to scale? Is it just to line my own pockets? Is that the purpose of business, or is it have some noble intention? So the answer of scale is that it's not a one size fits all, and a lot of companies cannot stay sustainable. They grow to the point where they're scaled, and then they die of digestion rather than starvation, as it said, right? They can't take all the new business that they've won.
You know, I've often thought that, and this goes back pre-pandemic, and I think it was really exacerbated by the supply chain issues we suffered as a result of the pandemic. But I always thought that the solution, particularly to a place like Memphis, and this goes back to what you said about ESOPs and growing wealth within the community and so forth, but that you'd be so much better served to have micro industries for a region as opposed to these large industries that are national and international. A good example is beer. Not all beer now. I mean, I probably rarely drink a beer that is nationally and internationally produced, because
Right.
There's so many great breweries in Memphis. Imagine if we did that with clothes and with ice cream and everything else. That would be a way to grow, workforces in the community that there may not be tens of thousands of people like the old days, but if you had 10, 500 to 1,000 person processes that serve the region,
Right.
add up to the better thing and be a little bit more risk averse because you're not putting all your eggs in one Electrolux basket. Oh, did I say that out loud? But you know what I mean.
Right. Well, I can tell you, it's interesting. In my career, I'm old. I've got a white beard. You know, I worked with Shearing Plow. I then worked with Merck Consumer Care, with who bought them. Then Bayer Consumer Care, they bought them. And each time it got bigger and more command central, as you're saying, and even global, the less human it seemed, the less they wanted to solve real market problems for real people, the less their hand was on the pulse, and the less they were invested in the communities where they were doing business, really meaningfully making that impact. So it's a question of, why are we creating value? If we're creating value to create a much better quality of life for a lot of people, that's a really interesting premise for doing business, right? Because we're rising everything in the way that, you know, that Ben and Jerry suppliers are.
Well, you know, one of my favorite lines from movies is from Trading Places, where Eddie Murphy's talking about, you know, I think it was orange juice or no, pork bellies. And he says, you know, everybody's just trying to get the G.I. Joe with the Kung Fu grip. And, you know, what he meant by that was everybody's just trying to make a living, and everybody's worried about that. And, you know, making a living is different. And I've been trying to use that phrase more. Making a living, making a life is a lot more than just making money. And I think more and more companies are coming around to that because of what you're saying, that you make a living not just for yourself, but for your community, because none of us exist on an island.
That's right. And then one other point I want to make that you were making is that, you know, we had the great fortune of helping Edge write the Brookings Institute economic profile for the region. And in a region where, God bless FedEx, you know, we wouldn't be Memphis without them. But we have only one mega cluster, economic mega cluster here, which is logistics. But if we had seeded at knowing that 7 or 8 other clusters, that these nodes, like I was that then began to foment and grow and develop, we wouldn't be stuck in that quagmire now where we still have only one mega cluster, right? And then so many knowledge workers are leaving the city. It's hard to hire tech talent here, right? I'm sure you've heard that on this podcast before. Because if I lose my one job, then where am I going to go? You know, it's not Seattle, it's not San Francisco, it's not Austin. So if we had several smaller clusters forming, and then with all the needs around them, we'd have a much more robust economy. So that's my vision for Memphis.
I think that, you know, if you go back to the 70s, and if you could talk to business leaders at that time, I think they really thought, well, maybe the 80s. I think they thought at that time that you really push logistics, and if logistics took off, that manufacturing would follow. You know, because if we're a logistics center, then you're going to want to be close to the logistics. And I don't think we really ever made that leap. And, you know, we've got some strong industry. I mean, the medical device industry is strong, and it could be a lot stronger.
Right.
And, you know, I think our music industry could be a lot stronger. We've got a lot of talent here. We've got a lot of, you know, legacy and tradition in music, and a lot of gravitas. I think, you know, a lot of music circles. You talk about Memphis, and they, you know, they really kind of step back with a little bit of awe. Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, Stax Records, Sun Records, and all kinds of other things. Could leverage that. I think, particularly now, that's a way to get a lot of tech jobs here, because entertainment is so much more tech driven than it used to be. But I, you know, again, I love Memphis. I know you do. I love I think we got a lot of upside, and we just got to keep working to make it better.
Indeed, very much.
Well, Michael, I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and I think you and I need to continue the conversation, because I think a lot of our philosophies are aligned. And you know, my mission, the mission of the Crone Law Firm, is to transform the American workplace into a place that's more equitable and fair and productive.
Right.
And I really do believe that if you focus on that, it's good business. And it's not just a plaintiff's employment lawyer saying, oh, things should be more equitable because that benefits my clients. I think it's a 360 thing. And I think we need to stop looking at business as a 180. It needs to be more of a 360. And it sounds like you share that value.
Very much. Yeah. The employee is at the center of it.
That's true. That's true. And, it's unfortunate if you're a business owner and you don't get that, then you're always going to have problems. If you think that the people are there just to be your tool and make you money, that may have worked for your grandfather, but it's not going to work for your kids. And I don't think it's working for you right now.
Indeed. Yeah, so true.
All right, Michael. Well, I've enjoyed it. Thank you for watching this. If you've watched and listened, please give Michael 5 stars on where you get your podcast, so that we can reach more people. And if Michael is going to go help companies innovate, and I'm going to go get some justice. So, thank you all very much.